Severance, Season 2, Episode 4. And wow, what a great episode! First of all, the episode starts with Irving on a frozen lake. It takes him a bit, but he sees his other co-workers over on the lakeside and has to go to them. He's clearly concerned about being on thin ice, which is our first foreshadowing of something happening to Irving. When we see all the workers from the macro data refinement department at Lumen Industries all together, the first thing that jumps out is they're all obviously dressed alike. Now, many people have commented that they are dressed like Soviets, which symbolizes the repressive, controlling Soviet regime which they liken to Lumen Industries. Okay, so I want to stop right here and talk about this for a few minutes because I disagree. Here's the thing. Yes, their clothing is Russian, but if it were Soviet, it would look more like this. It wouldn't be the beautiful, thick fur coats. Instead, I think their clothing harkens back further in Russian history. Remember, Mark's wife was a professor of Russian literature.
Mark's late wife, Gemma, was an educator as well, Russian literature.
Oh, I love literature.
Right?
Well, what is the greatest work of Russian literature? Possibly the greatest work of all literature? A lot of highly educated people say it's Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. What is The Brothers Karamazov about? It explores identity and the nature of the self. And guess what? How many Brothers Karamazov are there? 3. Each of the 3 brothers represents a different philosophical and psychological approach to identity, that question of,
who are you?
There's Dmitri, the sensualist self. He's ruled by impulse, by passion, by desire. There's Ivan, the intellectual or the rationalist self. He's a highly intellectual atheist who believes in logic but struggles with the problem of good and evil. And then finally there's Alyosha, the compassionate self. He's the embodiment of faith and morality. He wrestles with doubt and what it means to be a good person. Now, I'm not saying that each one of these male characters in Severance is a complete match with Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha. That would be too easy. But it definitely uses the Brothers Karamazov as inspiration. And is it possible that we think Severance is a show about Mark because, well, it is his picture on the promo title and the opening credits, but is it about Mark or is it about all of these characters? In episode 4, the main character was definitely Irving, who has some strong characteristics of Alyosha, the faith and morality brother. Irving is the one in prior episodes who's drinking the Lumen Industries Kool-Aid, but then he begins wrestling with his faith in Lumen after he begins a relationship with Bert, and then Bert's apparently terminated. And notice, here Irving is, in episode 4, carrying the Bible, if you will, of Lumen Industries as they make their journey through the wilderness. By the way, there's a 4th brother in the Brothers Karamazov, Pavel Smerdyakov, who is an illegitimate child of Karamazov. So he isn't really one of the brothers, or is he? This character believes that free will is an illusion. He believes he's condemned to the fate of his illegitimate birth. And at one point, one of the characters in Brothers Karamazov tells Pavel, "You're not even human." Now, let's explore this further. Dostoevsky has a chapter in Brothers Karamazov that we call the Grand Inquisitor. That chapter asks the question, do humans have free will, or do they prefer to be controlled? That sounds an awful lot like our storyline in Severance. Oh, and that 4th child, Pavel Smerdyakov, he struggles with whether his actions are predetermined by his upbringing, or does he have the capacity to choose his own path for himself? Again, that sounds an awful lot like our storyline, doesn't it? Is Helena the child of her father, or is she free to choose her own path? And getting back to Irving, or Alyosha, He believes in moral agency and in redemption. He believes who you are can be self-determined. And what happens in episode 4? Alyosha, or Irving, takes charge of his identity. He gets to the truth of Lumen, and notice what happens. Ben Stiller could have chosen any camera angle for this scene. He could have shot the scene from behind and shown Irving looking up at Dylan. Instead, the scene shows Irving from above. His face is lit up. He stands in a position very reminiscent of other stories where one is reborn or redeemed. Irving has found redemption. And by the way, in the Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha is the hero. Will Irving be the hero of Severance? Who knows? Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but I don't think so. And there's something else about Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was writing in response to ideas that were very popular to debate in Dostoevsky's time. And where did these ideas that Dostoevsky wrestled with come from? Glasgow, Scotland.
It's Milchik. Remove the Glasgow block now.
So if we look back to Scottish Enlightenment, there's David Hume, a key figure who was widely studied in the time of Dostoevsky. David Hume claims that the self, again, the
Who are you?
is just a bundle of perceptions with no true unity. Hume also famously says that reason is the slave of the passions. Now, for Dostoevsky, he might agree that we're not pure rational beings. We have passions. We act irrationally.
For suggesting we eat that animal. I suppose it sounded alarmist and paranoid, irrational.
The danger, though, is where that irrationality can take us if we let it. Now, the super technical people out there may be saying, hey, dummy, David Hume was in Edinburgh, not Glasgow. And that's right. But there's another guy who definitely has direct ties to Glasgow, Scotland. That guy is Adam Smith, the author of The Wealth of Nations. Smith is also part of the Scottish Enlightenment, and he was close friends with David Hume. Now, what ideas did Adam Smith write about that were percolating in Dostoevsky's head? Well, in Adam Smith's The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he argues that human morality is rooted in our ability to sympathize with others. And his idea of sympathy refers to our capacity to imaginatively place ourselves in another person's situation and assess their emotions. This is a very rational way of thinking about morality and human judgments. Dostoevsky takes a more nuanced approach. For Dostoevsky, there's a dark side to human nature that the Scottish Enlightenment philosophers failed to account for in Dostoevsky's mind. Simply put, Dostoevsky believes in pure evil. And it's important to keep in mind that Adam Smith is the guy that undergirds all of our Western economic and philosophical and cultural thinking and progress. Smith says that people act in their rational self-interest. In other words, people will think about what is the best choice to make and make the choice that benefits them. Now, to this, Dostoevsky strongly disagrees. To very loosely quote Dostoevsky, man does not act for his own advantage. Who wants to want in a rational way? In other words, you don't desire things in a rational way. You desire what you can't have. And so, for instance, in Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, the protagonist, rationalizes murder using a distorted view of self-interest. Now, all of that is super simplified, and certainly there's a lot of nuance to all these philosophers' opinions. We're talking about broad strokes here. But so, that's why I believe the Glasgow Protocol is so named, because it's paying homage to the Scottish Enlightenment philosophers that Dostoevsky writes against. Okay, now, let's talk about the dead seal. We went from goats in prior episodes to now a dead seal. Why do they put a dead seal in here when the setting of this story is the waterfront of a freshwater lake? Someplace you wouldn't expect to find a seal? Well, the seal is a creature that inhabits both land and sea and is symbolic in certain cultures. In Nordic mythology, the seal represented duality, the tension between two worlds. The sight of a seal in the water was the sign of a soul returning or a connection being made to the afterlife. When Helena gives Irving a snow seal, it sent chills up my spine because it meant something was about to happen to Irving. And in the back and forth shots between Helena having sex with Mark and Irving in the woods, it almost looks like Helena isn't thinking about Mark. She's seeing Irving in the woods and going to him in the form of woe. Okay, now, shifting gears, there's another subject in episode 4 that I want to touch on, and to do that, we need to go back a bit in the episode. Lots of people have said that they think Severance touches on issues involving alcoholism, particularly with the main character of Mark. In season 1, Mark's sister says,
Though, if I'm sorry, Mark and my dad used to have whiskey as life carved on flask.
Speaking of which, you still smell like a distillery.
so, with everyone focused on alcoholism, I fully expected people to make the connection on this scene, but I haven't seen it anywhere yet. As everyone knows, this image of Jack Nicholson is from The Shining, a Stanley Kubrick film from the novel written by Stephen King. Now, what is The Shining about? Well, lots of people debate The Shining's meaning. That's what good art does, and Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick are great artists. But most people agree that on one level, The Shining is the story of Jack Torrance, a recovering alcoholic who loses touch with reality due to alcoholism's destructive power. Oh, and by the way, Ben Stiller was in talks to play in the stage production of The Shining as the main character, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen. Maybe he was researching things about the book and the movie, and someone thought he was interested in playing the role, so the story comes out that he was in talks to play in the stage production. And this isn't the first reference to The Shining. There's the maze-like nature of the Overlook Hotel, as well as the actual maze that was on the hotel grounds, kind of like the maze that makes up the hallways of Lumen. And some people believe that The Shining is a metaphor of the Holocaust because of Stanley Kubrick's interest in the topic. Is Lumen Industries engaged in a form of eugenics? Numbers play a prominent part in Kubrick's films, The Shining included. And in this scene, Irving is dreaming, looking at his computer screen where the numbers 1, 5, and 7 are mixed all over the screen. Now, Stanley Kubrick was a meticulous director, and the numbers 1, 5, and 7 supposedly have special significance in The Shining. I don't know. It's been a very long time since I've seen that movie, but as Irving is looking at the screen, notice the number 4 gets mixed in with the 1s, 5s, and 7s. Kubrick was very particular about the number 4, and he used it repeatedly in his films. From what I understand, Kubrick was a fan of numerology. And in numerology, the number 4 symbolizes structure, rigidity. Think of a box or a rigid square. Now, also in numerology, the numbers 5 and 7 represent change. And the number 1 represents individuality, navigating between change and structure. So, Irving looks at his screen, sees these numbers mixing all about, and he sees a hero breaking free from a rigid system towards enlightenment. And one more thing about those numbers. The first number in the alphabet is A. The 5th, E. The 7th, G. And the 1 and the 4, or 14th, is N. Egan. There was so much more in this episode, I could go for an hour. Like, we learned the first name of Mr. Milchick, which is Seth. Seth is a biblical name with specific meaning. There have been lots of biblical references in prior episodes. Maybe, if this video gets some views and I can manage it, I'll go back through prior episodes and point out some things in them like I've done with this episode. For instance, there were some references to Christopher Nolan in prior episodes, much the way this episode paid homage to Stanley Kubrick, that I haven't seen anyone point out yet. So please click the like button if you like this content, and click subscribe if you want to see more videos breaking down Severance. That's all for now. I can't wait for the next episode. Can you?